My HOA tried to fine me $1,000 a day for farming on my own land. They sent threatening letters. They harassed my family and they tried to force me out. But they made one big mistake. They picked a fight they couldn't win. This is the story of how a single legal document not only stopped the harassment, but put a legal wall around my property they couldn't cross. It all started with a simple dream, the kind that feels like it's baked into our DNA. The dream of owning a piece of land, working it with your own hands, and feeding your family from the dirt you call home. For years, my wife and I had talked about it, sketched it out on napkins in diners, and scrolled through property listings late at night. We'd spent a decade in a cramped suburban house where the only dirt we owned was in a few flower pots on the porch. We yearned for space, for a horizon that wasn't our neighbor's siding, for the deep satisfaction of self-sufficiency. After years of scrimping, saving every bonus, and driving old cars until they practically disintegrated, we finally found it. 10 acres of rolling pasture in the countryside, dotted with old-growth oaks that had stood there for a century, and a modest, sturdy house. It wasn't just a property. It was our forever home. The place where we would watch our kids grow up, where we would grow old together. There was a catch, of course. There's always a catch, right? The house itself, on about a half-acre lot, was technically part of a newer subdivision that had sprung up on the edge of this old agricultural area. That meant it was part of a homeowners association. The other 9.5 acres, they were not. They were zoned for agriculture and had been for nearly a century. This was a critical distinction, one we confirmed with the county clerk's office before we even made an offer. We pored over zoning maps and deeds, tracing the property lines with our fingers, ensuring we understood the legal separation. When we voiced our concerns to the real estate agent, he just waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, that's nothing to worry about," he'd said with a practiced, easy smile. "They'll only have a say over your house paint and grass length on the residential bit. They can't touch the rest of it. Legally, it's a different world." Famous last words. That first year was pure, unadulterated bliss. We were finally living the life we'd always imagined. The days were long and filled with a kind of purposeful exhaustion we'd never known. I bought a rusted-out 20-year-old tractor for a song and spent the first month taking it apart and putting it back together in the old barn, the smell of grease and oil mingling with the scent of hay. My wife, who had a gift for bringing things back to life, restored the barn structure, patching the roof and reinforcing the beams until it was our command center. Together we tilled a 2-acre plot for a market garden. Heirloom tomatoes, zucchini, squash, string beans, peppers, you name it. We got a small flock of chickens, and their cheerful, bubbling clucking became the soundtrack to our new life. My kids, who had previously thought food magically appeared in the grocery store, were discovering a new world. They were learning where their food came from, collecting warm, brown eggs in the morning with a sense of wonder and helping me pull stubborn weeds in the afternoon. It was hard, physical work, the kind that leaves your muscles aching and your back stiff, but fills your soul in a way no office job ever could. Every evening we would sit on the porch, drinking iced tea, watching the sunset paint the sky over our fields, and feel a profound sense of peace. This was real. This was ours. The neighbors in the subdivision were distant. They lived in their identical beige mini-mansions, their lives governed by a thick binder of rules about satellite dishes, the precise height of their manicured lawns, and the approved shades of Christmas lights. We'd wave when we drove past, but the waves we got in return were hesitant, uncertain. It was clear we were from a different world. Our world had dirt under its fingernails and hay in its hair. Theirs had quarterly HOA meetings and professionally maintained flower beds. The first hint of trouble wasn't a letter. It was a person. A woman I'll call Eleanor, the HOA board president. I saw her often, walking her perfectly coiffed miniature poodle along the road bordering my property. One afternoon, I was on my tractor, the diesel engine rumbling as I turned over a new section of field, preparing it for a fall planting of cover crops. She stopped at the edge of the road, her arms crossed, squinting at me as if I were a particularly unpleasant insect. "That's quite an operation you've got going there," she said, her voice dripping with a syrupy condescension that set my teeth on edge. "Very rustic." I smiled, determined to be neighborly, and cut the engine. The sudden silence was filled with the chirping of crickets. "Just living the dream," I replied, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my glove. "Yes, well," she sniffed, pulling her poodle away from a patch of clover it was curiously sniffing. "Let's just hope your dream doesn't become a nightmare for the rest of us. We have certain standards in this community. Property values, you know." She walked off without another word, leaving a sour taste in my mouth. It was a classic passive-aggressive warning shot, a thinly veiled threat disguised as neighborly concern. It was a clear signal, "We're watching you." I tried to shrug it off. What could they possibly do? The law, the deeds, the county zoning ordinances, it was all on my side. They had no jurisdiction. I was sure of it. 2 weeks later, the first letter arrived. It was in a crisp white envelope with a professional-looking HOA logo embossed in the corner. The weight of the paper, the formality of the layout, it was all designed to be intimidating. The letter was written in that chillingly polite, corporate speak that's meant to sound reasonable while being utterly inflexible. It informed me that I was in violation of several covenants, referencing vague bylaws about aesthetic, standards, community harmony, and non-residential use of property. It claimed my large-scale agricultural activities were not in keeping with the community's character, specifically mentioning that the tractor was unsightly and often visible from the road. The letter conveniently ignored the glaringly obvious fact that this landscape had been productive farmland for 100 years before their subdivision was a blueprint on a developer's desk. The original farmhouse, long since gone, had stood not 50 yards from where my own house was now. The final paragraph was the kicker. "You are hereby instructed to cease all agricultural operations immediately and remove all associated equipment from public view. Failure to comply will result in further action being taken by the association." I read it 3 times, the words blurring slightly. It was utterly absurd. They were trying to tell me I couldn't farm my own farm. My first reaction wasn't anger, but weary disbelief. This had to be a mistake. A simple overreach by some overzealous board member who didn't understand the clear property lines. Surely a simple explanation would clear it all up, so I did what any reasonable person would do. I sat down and wrote a polite, detailed letter back. I was calm, respectful, and factual. I included a copy of my property plat, the one from the closing, with the demarcation of the agricultural land highlighted in yellow. I included a copy of the county's zoning confirmation, stating plainly that the 9.5 acres were designated for agricultural use. I gently explained that while I was more than happy to follow all the rules for my house and the half-acre it sat on, their authority ended where the farmland began. I mailed it off, certified, and considered the matter closed. I had no idea I'd just thrown a pebble at a hornet's nest. The hornets didn't wait long to swarm. A week later, their response arrived. This one wasn't in a friendly-looking HOA envelope. It was from a law firm, a big one from downtown with a long list of partners on the letterhead. The polite corporate tone was gone, replaced with aggressive, impenetrable legalese. It stated that my interpretation of the rules was erroneous and self-serving. It claimed some boilerplate nonsense about a covenant giving them authority over activities on adjacent properties that may negatively impact the aesthetic harmony and property value of the community. It was a laughable legal argument, a desperate stretch of a vague clause, but seeing it on a lawyer's letterhead, knowing they had a legal team on retainer doesn't feel very funny. It feels like a threat. And then the hammer dropped. "Be advised," the letter read, "that due to your continued non-compliance, the board has voted to impose a fine of $1,000 per day, with such fines being applied retroactively to the date of the initial violation notice. $1,000 a day. My heart hammered against my ribs. My hands were shaking as I did the math. They were already claiming I owed them tens of thousands of dollars. It was a figure so outrageously high it couldn't be real, yet here it was, in black and white. It was a number designed to do one thing: terrify me into submission. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a declaration of war. The psychological campaign started almost immediately. Eleanor and other board members began conducting slow, deliberate drive-bys. They'd cruise past my property at a snail's pace, phones held up, openly taking pictures of me working, of my kids playing in the yard, of my wife tending to her flower garden. It was a constant, creeping invasion of our privacy, designed to make us feel watched, judged, and unwelcome in our own home. Then came the flood of petty violation notices, selective enforcement at its absolute worst. It was clear they were walking the property line, peering into my residential half-acre with binoculars, looking for anything: a $25 fine for my trash can being at the curb 3 hours too long on trash day, a $50 fine for a patch of clover in the lawn of the residential lot, citing non-approved ground cover, a formal notice that my son's basketball hoop had a visibly frayed net and that I had 7 days to replace it or face another fine. They were nitpicking me to death, building a paper trail of non-compliance while completely ignoring the same infractions at other homes throughout the neighborhood. It was a targeted, malicious, and deeply personal attack. The direct confrontation I'd been dreading happened on a bright, beautiful Saturday morning. I was out fixing a fence post near the road when Eleanor's gleaming black SUV pulled over with a crunch of gravel. "I just don't understand you people," she started, not even bothering with a greeting. "You move here, next to our beautiful community, and you insist on dragging it down with this filth." She waved a manicured hand contemptuously at my field of healthy, vibrant squash plants. "Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice steady through a monumental effort, "this is my property. I'm not breaking any laws." "Laws?" She let out a short, barking laugh that was devoid of any humor. "We are the law here. You are affecting our property values. My home, my single biggest investment, is losing value every day you continue this agricultural horror show." "That's just not true," I said, my last shred of patience evaporating. "And even if it were, you have no right." "I have every right," she snapped, her face turning blotchy with rage. "We have rules, covenants that you signed. People like you who think they can do whatever they want are a cancer to communities like this, and we will cut you out. I'm telling you this as a courtesy, one last time. Stop this now. It will be much, much easier for you if you just comply." The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. This wasn't about property values. This was about power. She was drunk on the tiny bit of authority her HOA title gave her, and she was going to crush anyone who didn't bow down to her. I tried one last time to appeal to reason at the monthly HOA meeting held in a soulless community clubhouse. It was a disaster, a total kangaroo court. The board members sat at a long table at the front with Eleanor at the head, looking impossibly smug. The moment I stood up to speak during the open forum portion, she theatrically started a 2-minute sand timer on the table. I tried to present my case logically to explain the zoning, but I was flustered and angry. The second the last grain of sand fell, she buzzed a little bell. "Time's up!" she chirped, cutting me off mid-sentence. "Thank you for your comments," she said dismissively, not making eye contact. "The board's position is final." Next agenda item. I walked out of that meeting feeling utterly defeated, humiliated, and completely alone. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, a certified letter arrived from the HOA's law firm. It was a formal notice of their intent to place a lien on my property for the now astronomical 6-figure sum of unpaid fines. The letter casually mentioned foreclosure as the next logical step in their collection process. The stress became a physical presence in our house. The joy we'd felt in our home was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. My wife and I were having tense, whispered conversations late at night. The kids could feel it. The dream was becoming a nightmare. The final straw, the moment that turned my fear and anxiety into cold, hard rage, was the flashing red and blue lights in my driveway one evening. 2 sheriff's cruisers. My heart leaped into my throat. Had there been an accident? An older deputy got out, his hand resting near his sidearm. "Sir," he said, his voice polite but firm, We received a call about a public nuisance and an illegal commercial operation at this address. It took me a second to process the words. A what? I'm farming my land. This is my home. Yes, sir, he said, looking around. The complainant, a Ms. Eleanor Bishop from the Homeowners Association, claimed you were running an unlicensed business, creating hazardous waste with your fertilizers, and that your machinery was a danger to the public. The humiliation was profound. Standing on my own land, under the suspicious gaze of law enforcement, forced to justify my very existence because of a malicious, calculated lie. I showed the deputies my fields, the compost pile that was apparently hazardous waste, and the tractor parked safely in the barn. They were professional, but it was clear they were annoyed at having their time wasted. As the deputies drove away, having obviously found no basis for the complaint, something inside me shifted. The fear, the anxiety, the feeling of being a victim, it all vanished. All that was left was a quiet, burning, and intensely focused resolve. I had been polite. I had been reasonable. I had followed the rules. In return, they had lied, harassed my family, threatened to take my home, and now sent the police to my door. The time for playing defense was over. They wanted a war? They were about to get one. That night I slept soundly for the first time in months. I woke up with a feeling of total clarity. I was done being the victim. I was done reacting to their moves. From now on, I was setting the terms of engagement. My goal wasn't just to survive this onslaught. It was to win so decisively that Eleanor and her board of petty tyrants would never forget my name. Step one was obvious. Playing amateur lawyer and writing polite letters had gotten me nowhere. Their main weapon was their law firm. I needed my own. More than that, I needed a cannon. I spent the next 2 days glued to my computer, diving deep into legal forums, State Bar Association websites, and news articles. I wasn't just looking for a property lawyer. I was searching for a specialist, a shark who knew HOA law inside and out and had a documented history of winning against abusive associations. I found him in a city an hour away. His name was Ben Carter, and his website was full of testimonials from people just like me. He was expensive, a fact his assistant made clear when I booked the consultation. But peace of mind, I realized, doesn't have a price tag. Neither does justice. Walking into Ben's office felt like stepping out of a hurricane and into a calm, quiet harbor. He was in his late 50s with a reassuring, folksy demeanor that couldn't quite hide a razor-sharp legal mind glinting in his eyes. I laid out the whole sordid saga, handing him the heavy box that had become my burden. It contained every threatening letter, every fine notice, every photo I'd secretly taken of their drive-bys, and a detailed log of every instance of harassment. I had documented everything. Ben listened patiently, his face impassive, nodding occasionally. When I finally finished, the whole ugly story hanging in the air, he leaned back in his leather chair, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. Well, he said, his voice calm and steady. They're bullies with a letterhead. And bullies, in my experience, have one fatal flaw. They only know how to punch down. They have absolutely no idea what to do when someone punches back. Hard. He spread my documents across his massive conference table, organizing them into piles. He read their lawyers' arguments and let out a few derisive chuckles. Their whole case, he explained, pointing to the legalese, is built on legal tissue paper. It's a bluff. They aren't planning to go to court. They know this argument is weak. They're planning to bleed you dry with legal fees and scare you into submission before it ever gets that far. It's a classic HOA strategy. Then he stopped, his finger landing on a thick-bound document at the bottom of the pile, the original developer's master plan and declarations. But they made a mistake, he said, his voice dropping, taking on a tone of discovery. A big one. This was the aha moment, the turning point you see in movies. Ben had found our silver bullet, buried deep in the dense, almost unreadable fine print of the HOA's own founding documents, the very source of their supposed power. Right here, Ben said, tapping a specific paragraph. He slid the document across the table to me. It was dense legalese, but he translated it. The meaning was crystal clear. Any pre-existing parcel of land zoned for agriculture over 5 acres in size was explicitly exempt from all covenants. Conditions and restrictions relating to land use, aesthetics and non-residential activities. The only rules that applied to my property were the ones pertaining to the dwelling itself. The right to farm provisions in state law further backed this up, protecting established agricultural areas from nuisance complaints. The HOA had either forgotten this clause existed or, far more likely, had willfully ignored it, hoping I would never find it. Their entire campaign of harassment, the $1,000-a-day fines, the threats of a lien and foreclosure, it was all built on a deliberate lie. They didn't just have a weak case. They had no case at all. They had zero authority, but Ben wasn't done. He leaned forward, his calm demeanor replaced by a hunter's focus. "Beating them isn't enough," he said. "That just makes them go away for a little while. We need to stop the harassment for good. We need to make them afraid of you." That's when he explained the masterstroke. We were going to formally and legally revoke their implied license to enter my property. As a property owner, Ben explained, you give an implied license for people like the mailman, delivery drivers, or visitors to approach your home. However, you have the absolute legal right to revoke that permission for any specific individual, at any time, for any reason. We would draft a legally binding notice of withdrawal of implied license and demand to cease and desist. This notice will inform every single board member by name, plus their management company and their lawyers, that they are legally forbidden from setting foot anywhere on your 10 acres. Ben laid out, a glint in his eye. Not your driveway, not your porch, not even the first inch of your lawn. Any attempt to do so after being served could be considered criminal trespass. We will also demand that all future communication, without exception, go exclusively through my office. Any direct contact with you or your family, a letter, an email, a phone call, a drive-by, will be considered a violation of this notice and will be pursued as actionable harassment. This wasn't just a shield. It was a sword. It was a legal wall, a fortress, around my property. Ben's office drafted the most intimidating, beautiful legal document I'd ever seen. It was 10 pages of pure, undiluted legal power. It detailed every action they'd taken, citing the specific state statutes on trespass and harassment they were now violating. And on page 3, it revealed the bombshell, the paragraph from their own bylaws that proved they had no authority, making their entire campaign an act of bad faith. We weren't just going to mail it. The HOA's monthly meeting was in 2 days. Ben hired a professional process server. The plan was as brilliant as it was theatrical. Have the server walk into that public meeting and serve each board member, including Eleanor, one by one, right there in front of the entire community. The call from Ben came at 7:45 p.m. on meeting night. I was pacing a trench in my kitchen floor. "It's done," he said, pure satisfaction in his voice. Server walked in, called their names one by one, and handed them the papers right at the dais. He said you could have heard a pin drop. Eleanor apparently went as white as a ghost. The silence that followed was deafening. The harassing emails stopped. The slow drive-bys ceased. My mailbox, for the first time in months, was blessedly empty of their venom. It was wonderful, but it was also tense. We had fired our cannon. Now we waited for the smoke to clear. 10 days later, a thick envelope arrived, not at my house, but at Ben's office. He forwarded me a copy. It was a letter from the HOA's law firm. It was incredibly beautifully short. "Dear Mr. Carter," it read, "please be advised that upon review, the Board of Directors has voted to rescind all outstanding fines and violations related to your client's property. The association now considers this matter closed." That was it. No apology. No admission of guilt. Just a full, unconditional, and humiliating surrender. They folded completely. The prospect of fighting a lawsuit they were now guaranteed to lose and potentially facing personal liability for harassment and bad faith actions was too much for them. They had bluffed, we had called, and they threw their cards on the table and ran. I walked outside, stood on my porch, and looked out over my land, my fields, my barn, my home. The air felt lighter. The constant knot of anxiety in my stomach was gone. It was mine again, truly and completely. The war was over. I had won. The victory wasn't loud or explosive. There were no parades, no public apologies. It was a quiet, deep, profound sense of relief that washed over our family. The cloud that had been hanging over our dream home had finally dissipated. I heard through the grapevine, a friendly neighbor who had secretly been rooting for me, that Eleanor resigned as board president a few months later, citing personal reasons. The bullies, once punched squarely in the nose, retreated into the shadows. Looking back on that harrowing year, the lessons are crystal clear, and they are lessons I believe every homeowner should know. First, document everything. From the very first weird conversation, the first condescending comment, start a file. Save every email, log every interaction with the date, time, and details. When you're in a fight like this, the person with the better paper trail almost always wins. That box of evidence I brought to my lawyer wasn't just a pile of paper. It was the foundation of my entire counteroffensive. Second, read your governing documents. All of them. The covenants, conditions and restrictions, CC&Rs, the bylaws, the master plan. Yes, they're boring, they're dense, and they feel like they're written in another language. But somewhere in that legalese might be the very clause that sets you free. We got lucky finding that exemption, but you have to look. HOAs rely on the fact that you will never read the rules. Know their rule book better than they do. Third, understand the hierarchy of law. HOA rules do not trump city ordinances, county zoning, or state and federal laws. My position was massively strengthened by county zoning regulations and our state's right-to-farm laws, which are specifically designed to protect agricultural operations from exactly the kind of nuisance complaints my neighbors were making. Your rights as a property owner are often far more robust than an HOA wants you to believe. They want you to think their rules are the only ones that matter. They are not. Finally, and this is the most important lesson, when the threats escalate, stop trying to be reasonable with unreasonable people and hire a professional. Don't let them scare you with their lawyer. Get your own shark. A good lawyer doesn't just give advice. They take the crushing emotional burden off your shoulders and turn your righteous anger into a focused, effective legal strategy. The money I spent on Ben Carter was, without a doubt, the best investment I have ever made. It bought me my home back. This fight wasn't just about my right to farm a small piece of land. It was about the fundamental right to be left alone on your own property, to pursue your dream without being harassed by petty tyrants on a power trip. They thought I was an easy target. They believed they could bury me in fines, legal threats, and intimidation until I gave up and conformed. They were wrong. And the quiet satisfaction of that victory is something I feel every single morning when I walk out onto my land. This was my story, but I know thousands of you have your own HOA horror stories. Drop them in the comments below. Let's share what has worked, what hasn't, and create a community for people tired of being pushed around. The more we share our knowledge and experiences, the more powerful we all become. And if you found this story satisfying or helpful, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. Sharing this video also helps get the word out to other homeowners who might be feeling powerless and alone right now. Remember, knowledge is power and you are not alone.